Hey everybody, no opening slate on this video because oh my god, last week people read in a bunch. I'm just having fun at their expense because I have pissed off pretty much every toxic fandom out there. Usually, well, I don't intend to piss anyone off. Sometimes I think I know that it's going to piss somebody off. I'm a very bad judge of who is going to get pissed off by something. And I think that a lot of it is just, it was that day. Somebody found it, somebody ran with it. A lot of internet things just wrong day, wrong time. Just you were the guy who weren't supposed to be there today, right? Cthulhu's hiding again. So we're going to talk about toxic fandoms today and what some of the ingredients are for a toxic fandom, like the Last of Us fandom. The Last of Us fandom is toxic as fuck. As much as I liked the first game, as much as I loved the first 3 episodes of the HBO series and think Pedro Pascal and Bella Ramsey are amazing on that show, Last of Us fandom is toxic as fuck. I say that now. That it hits every marker that, you know, that I identified in terms of toxic fandom. So we'll see how this goes. This is a work in progress. But we got to start somewhere because, oh my God, enough. Enough. Children, go to your room. All right, if you like this sort of content, help support this channel. Become a monthly patron, patreon.com/LeannaK, or buy a one-time Leanna Care session for someone who can use it but can't afford it, coffee.com/LeannaK. I avoided talking about pop culture stuff for a while because my primary interest these days is in game design, but like really nerdy game design stuff that nobody cares about on YouTube, and mental health stuff. And I don't like doing contentious stuff because it shits up the comments. And I like people to be able to connect. But last week's video on Wednesday reminded me. And I can't believe I forgot. I think it's because after the whole Last of Us 2 shitstorm, I've lost fucking track between Game of Thrones and Star Wars and Rick and Morty and then She-Hulk and the Rick and Morty She-Hulk crossover and all that stuff. He-Man. I don't remember what came what. Just so many toxic fandoms. The Steven Universe She-Ra crossover. You know, Supernatural, The Boys stuff. And I mean, what's interesting is that there's an example of Supernatural fandom is way more toxic than The Boys fandom is. And that was the one that made me think of some of the things on this list. But the first thing I found that is a fairly good predictor of whether a fandom is going to be toxic is that the IP is good but overrated. Things that are just bad are one thing. You may get the people who, okay, it's so bad, it's good, I love it. But when something is good, but really overrated, the fandom becomes exceptionally toxic. And that's what happens to the Last of Us fandom between the first game moving into the DLC to the second game. The first game was legitimately good at what it did. And then it became a thing. And then it became overrated, right? We saw a similar thing happen with Witcher fandom, but Witcher fandom started coming out of it. Around The Witcher 2, Witcher fandom was toxic as fuck. So fucking toxic, so bad. You couldn't say any quibble you had about that second game, even though it had a memory leak on PC that they never fucking fixed. Even in the Assassin of Kings edition. You couldn't anything. Nope, get her. Witcher 3 came out, and it was, if not the best game that year, one of the absolute best games that year. The Witcher 3 was a fantastic game, and the fandom became less toxic. And then the TV show came out, and it was Henry Cavill and then a bunch of WTF. And it got toxic again. You see how that works? Because there's another thing that ties in, that there's a fake moral high ground. And this fake moral high ground, it isn't necessarily a left-wing high ground, because in The Witcher 2 is, oh my god, boobs! Oh my god, boobs! There's sex, there's boobs, there's boobs! Protect the boobs! Right? And we see that with a bunch of other things as well. That in itself is some sort of high ground that they feel they have to defend. Now, again, The Witcher, I keep using that because that was like Witcher 2 toxicity. By the time it got to the Netflix show, which again, Henry Cavill, great, rest of show, not good. Jaskier was fun. But then it was strong female characters, fake moral high ground. Yennefer in the Witcher books, and definitely in The Witcher 3, much stronger character than in the Netflix show. And in that case, there seemed to be something of a derision within the writing staff for the original source material, which comes into another thing I'm going to talk about later. But we see that in The Last of Us 2 as well. The first game was just a story about two people, Joel and Ellie. There was no statement, right? It wasn't strong female character. It wasn't LGBTQ plus representation. It wasn't any of that stuff. It was just a game that Ellie was spunky, it wasn't presented as, look, strong female character. It was, Joel was sort of the main character in most people's minds. Ellie was a sidekick, and then she just blew the roof off the whole thing, right? No fake moral high ground to defend there. We saw it. The reason She-Hulk got so toxic, I believe, and that fandom's toxic. It is toxic. I mean, the way it went both ways, because the pre-existing Marvel fans who felt attacked felt they had to defend that high ground of, we are the audience and you are attacking the audience. And then the people who didn't realize that you weren't supposed to agree with Jen did the whole fucking girl boss bullshit, and they were toxic too. And we got this DNA double helix of fucking toxicity on that show. I loved the show. I couldn't stand the discourse around it. Toxic as fuck, right? And, then we get into, I'll go to the next one. That, because the other one that got very, very toxic was He-Man. And this does fit the first two, but definitely the next one I'm going to get to. He-Man was never the smartest IP of 80s kid shows. Shows like Transformers and Thundercats were both far more sophisticated. He-Man was made for peanuts. It's charming because of what they managed to do with how little. But it was ingenious storytelling. Nobody needed it to be. I was 6. Older? No, I was 6 when it came out. Maybe 7. But then it became this thing, this nostalgia. And people are like, that's my childhood. And now we get into the fake moral high ground. This was when I used to matter. When guys like me used to matter. And they put a whole bunch of stuff into He-Man that didn't exist in the original He-Man. And there's two sides of the next one. And I wasn't sure how to put it, so this is sort of the same point told two different ways. There are either clashing generations in a fandom, or the IP overstays its welcome. And we see that in He-Man, and we see that in Star Wars, and we see that in, like I said, the Steven Universe to She-Ra continuum, and the Rick and Morty to She-Hulk continuum. The toxicity moved from Steven Universe to She-Ra, and then from Rick and Morty to She-Hulk. Because there were the Rick and Morty fans and the Steven Universe fans that, like, the Rick and Morty fans just, the hatred for Jen Gao pre-existed She-Hulk there, and it just continued. But Steven Universe is one of those fandoms that makes no sense how toxic it is, because the show is just so soft. More on that in a bit. I have some theories about that. But the clashing generations in He-Man, in Star Wars, before all of that was Star Trek. Star Trek had like a 10-year, 15-year head start on all the other fandoms. And so it was going through its literal next generation phase at around the same time the Star Wars prequels were coming out. But after Wrath of Khan came out in theaters, Star Trek fandom changed. And until those prequels in Star Wars came out, Star Wars was the cool fandom for people that didn't take shit too seriously, and the Star Trek fans were the ones that everybody's like, I like the show, but stay away from me. You are way too intense, right? But then Next Generation came out, and there was a whole new group of fans that might not have watched the original series. Really like Next Generation, especially people who started watching it season 3. But they did the Saturday morning cartoon audience proxy thing with Wesley Crusher and really miscalculated. And we all know how the toxicity around that character happened. But that was the older class of fans mostly who were so rough on Wesley Crusher. But again, the minute you have clashing generations, you get the Star Wars phenomenon, the He-Man phenomenon, in that there were fans of the 2002 series that didn't really, they liked it better than the 80s show. And they went more anime with that 2002 series. I did not like the 2002 series, so I preferred the stuff that they pivoted back to the silliness of the 80s in the Kevin Smith show. But oh my God, the people who thought the 2002 series was an improvement felt betrayed. Same with the prequel people from Star Wars who now, feel like the current stuff, it's more like the stuff that came out episodes 1, 2, and 3 through the Christmas special, right? So they feel like this isn't my Star Wars anymore. When you start trying to bring along the nostalgia crowd and bring in new people, you get that clash and you get toxic because everyone is expecting the thing to be for them. And it's not 100% for them. They have to share. The pie's too big to have everybody feel satisfied in what they're eating. And this is where the second part of this point, the IP overstaying its welcome. All of this stuff, it's been around for a while. Marvel Comics characters, Star Wars, Star Trek, He-Man and She-Ra, they all have the issue of how to evolve as the world changes. And at some point, for whatever reason, the IP gets stuck. And instead of doing the awesome shit that Star Wars is doing in the games, in that it's other parts of the universe. It's not just the fucking Skywalkers and Palpatines. The film and streaming properties are obsessed with that same 50-year period. And it's tired. And it's stale. And it's starting to contradict itself. And they wiped out the extended universe so they wouldn't have to worry about rights attribution and payouts. And then they just told a lot of the same damn stories anyway. It's worn out. And so people are not feeling the same shock of the new that they did when it was new. When it was new and exciting. And, you know, say what you want about the prequels. At least George Lucas was telling a story with them. We may not have liked it, some of us, but it wasn't just like a sequel or an interquel. Dave Filoni, for some reason, loves interquels. Clone Wars was, what was it, between episodes 2 and 3? All of Clone Wars takes place. And then Mandalorian takes place after Return of the Jedi, before episode 7. That locks shit in. Why do we need that? I don't know. There is no real meaningful reason why we need more. It's a galaxy long ago, and a galaxy far away, and apparently in a teeny tiny geographic space and a cast of characters, right? Vast universe. We keep going back to the same 9 or 10 planets. It's overstayed its welcome. They obviously can't get stuff forward that are truly new ideas outside of the video games. But this stuff is tired. And so everybody is like, it's like Tachanka. It's like the Krogan homeworld. They've nuked it and everybody's just fighting over what's left. And when you get the 1-2 punch of the overstaying its welcome and the clash of generations, that gets really ugly, combined with the fake moral high ground, right? Because the fake moral high ground means that the younger fans attack the older fans, and it's like, this isn't for you anymore, which that's what every younger generation does to older generations, even to us Gen Xers that people call boomers. We're not boomers, but we're the apathy generation, so we don't care. While all this is going on, there's 3 more elements. As if that wasn't enough, there's 3 more elements that I find add to toxicity of the fandom. One, and this is where I put in the Supernatural versus The Boys conundrum, because obviously The Boys is a much darker show, but Supernatural fandom was so toxic, and it didn't make any sense based on the show. The only thing that made sense why Supernatural fandom was so toxic was the amount of shipping in the fandom. They were shipping the brothers together. And so every time any sort of love interest or supporting cast member came in that disrupted the ship, crazy! They like drove these day player actors off of social media. And Supernatural was another one. It was on the air forever. It was going on and on and on and on. I mean, there's Supernatural when Eric Kripke was showrunner up till season 5. And seasons 3 through 5 of Supernatural are phenomenal youth-oriented television. Really, really good. After that, it just keeps going. And you could tell they knew what the ending was, but it took forever to get there because they just kept getting renewed. And they just kept getting renewed. And you don't walk away from a successful show. They made money. Good for them. But it got so toxic. And I think the reason The Boys... The Homelander fans are weird. As the Homelander fangirls are exceptionally toxic. What is wrong with you? Again, the relationship, that weird parasocial relationship going on there. but it was nothing like Supernatural fandom. And I was like, is a fandom toxic when there's a critical mass of female fans? No, there are quite a few female-oriented fandoms that are not toxic. Female fans are more likely to get involved in shipping. It's the shipping that is the component that becomes toxic as fuck because they get too close to it. Case in point, Bo-Katan, Armorer shippers, toxic as fuck. Those people are, you just stay away. I don't get that. You know, there are plenty of people who like The Mandalorian that aren't toxic. When people get that far into it, it is not a guarantee you will be toxic. But the thing about that ship is, you have shipping plus fake moral high ground. Because, it's LGBTQ. And that's another problem with The Last of Us. I know people love the Ellie Riley thing. It's a bury your gaze to me. And I know that trope has fallen out of fashion, but there's a lot of bury your gaze in The Last of Us. And the only thing that kind of masquerades that is it's a bury your everyone show. You know, if you're not Ellie, you're not plot armored, you're worm food. And so people create these tragic ships, and at least on the show, the way they did the Bill and Frank relationship on the show versus the way they did it in the game, at least they got kind of a happy ending, which I think is why people gravitated towards that episode. I know it's why it's the favorite episode of mine of that entire first season. And that tells you something when your episode 3 diversion episode, because of the shooting schedule, and you need to give your lead actors a break. When that's the highlight, something's wrong with the writing. But again, IP good, overrated. The shipping is a problem, and it's not the shipping itself. It's when the shippers want their fanon to become canon. It happened with Supergirl and Kara and Lena. And shippers don't like to keep their ship where it belongs in their own fantasies. It even created some toxic elements in Lord of the Rings fandom and Harry Potter fandom. I don't know why I know the Harry Potter ship names. But for some odd reason, Legolas Aragorn shippers in Lord of the Rings, toxic. Hermione Dumbledore shippers, yes, there were those. In Harry Potter, toxic. I mean, that one speaks for itself, right? That's messed up. But, certain, and I think because it's like there's an element of wrong in some of those. And the Legolas and Aragorn one I didn't understand. And I finally asked a bunch of fangirls, who I was like, why that one? They're hugging in the first movie in Fellowship of the Ring. I'm like, what are you talking about? I go back and there's a scene where one of them's jumping across a chasm and the other kind of catches them and they do that. And I'm like, oh my God, they're just catching him so it doesn't fall, as they took that as a loving embrace. Okay, but when people start reading stuff in that much, that is the beginning of the cognitive distortions. And again, go ahead and ship. It can be fun. Just keep it in its place. I mean, you guys know I joked about Aloy crushing on the techie girl in Horizon Forbidden West. Now, I wasn't reading too much in there, but, we all kind of do it. We all kind of joke. But it gets, I mean, look at Falcon and Winter Soldier when Anthony Mackie was like, no, Sam and Bucky are just friends. And I know people who got really upset that I know are decent people. They're not insane. But, it's one thing to go, I don't agree. My take on that is, well, Bucky's kind of into Sam, but Sam's straight as an arrow. And that's cool. We can play with that. Right? But to attack the actor for his opinion on the character is toxic. To attack, any of the actors on the show because you don't like the writing, it's toxic. To attack Laura Bailey because you don't like what Abby did, it's toxic. To attack me because I made a supportive video about Ashley Johnson because I dared to talk about it because, oh my God, she wanted it to be private, even though it had been in USA Today. That is toxic. That is just poison. The remaining things, I'm saving the one that I really think is the critical mass for last. But these are the two. Fans have to wait a long time between installments. I find that the really toxic fandoms are the ones where they're like Game of Thrones, like Star Wars, like, some of these Netflix series that people point out that something weird happened with Stranger Things between the last two seasons because there was that wait. Game of Thrones is the classic example that there was such a massive delay between the second last and last seasons that people's imaginations were allowed to run wild. And there was so much speculation, there was so much hype that it could absolutely not live up to anyone's expectations. I think Marvel, to an extent, has a lot of that. I was really impressed with Guardians of the Galaxy because it subverted expectations in the right ways, and so it was satisfying. But it's one of the few I think really did live up to the hype, and I didn't think that was possible. But I think a lot of the Phase 4, Phase 5 toxicity surrounding Marvel properties is just because Infinity War and Endgame were really overrated, and people didn't want to admit it at the time because they were part of something popular. And now that was sort of a natural jumping off point for a lot of people, there's this like hangover. And that weight, the fact that we knew Kang was going to be the big bad, and we knew his first official appearance was going to be in Ant-Man and the Wasp, and I watched Quantumania, and I watched Twitter hype it up that Kang was going to kill Scott, and it was going to be this big bloodbath, and it was going to be the Kang show, and it was just a fun throwback Flash Gordon style family sci-fi epic with quite a bit of camp, quite a bit of throwback camp. People were disappointed because it wasn't that they hyped it in the marketing. It was the hype in their own head. They made so much about Kang being the big bad, right? And the Marvel villains, except for Thanos, I guess Thanos and Ultron, but Loki didn't start as a big bad. He started as the first Thor movie, which a lot of people didn't see right away, so they forget. No, they usually start humble and then they work up. But I don't think the response to Quantumania was fair. It was a perfectly enjoyable movie, A lot of the Phase 4, Phase 5 stuff has been perfectly enjoyable. The two exceptions I have with that are Black Widow and the Eternals. They were chores to watch. And how do you know Black Widow wasn't so great? Well, the big lasting impressions are Yelena, who was legit good and, was great in Hawkeye too. Underrated Phase 4 property. Hawkeye was good. But and then Red Guardian, which why? I don't get it. I don't have to because I'm not going to be toxic. The final element that, and this is the critical one, I think you can have every other box checked. It can be IP is good and overrated, fake moral high ground, clashing generations, IP is overstayed its welcome, a lot of shipping, a long time between installments. If the creators don't fan the flames, you don't have the toxicity. Now, Supernatural is the counter example to this. They didn't fan the flames at all. It was like, what's going on? That one had a mind of its own. So it's possible without the creators fanning the flames. But I think that the She-Hulk creators fanning the flames was insecurity. And I think a lot of the times when the creators get involved, it is insecurity. I know when I've fought too hard against criticisms of me, it has been insecurity. It just feels so unfair that people are ascribing motivations. And that's why I don't do the suck it thing. I come on and say, no, this hurts. Because I don't want to fan the toxicity. But, the She-Hulk creators did. And just understanding why they did it, seeing it as a completely human response. And pro tip, guys, creators of your favorite shows do that to their fans a lot. I'm always stunned. When I worked at G4, real looking down at the audience. I was kind of stunned. I remember one time I was there, one of my first gigs working with other talent, and it was at E3, and we were getting ready to shoot because they had that thing on kind of the show floor, and they let the crowds in, and people started coming and lining up on sort of the rope line, and the person I was working with went, "Oh, look, nerds," and missing it. I was like, "Yeah, that's what people are." It's more common than you want to think. I don't like it. I don't agree with it. On the stuff I work on, I send a tone of respect. But when people are being mean, it is human to get your hackles up. But the what is it, Neil Stevenson now did fan a lot of flames. Too much commentary. The Witcher Netflix showrunner fan the flames. Some Star Wars stuff. Star Wars has gotten better with how they respond, a lot better. But for a while there, they fanned the flames. And I mean, Dave Filoni fanned the flames pretty bad in places. I've been learning more and more about some of the stuff he's said. And it's like, yeah, those were toxic comments. And The Last of Us, Druckmann fanned the fucking flames. And did it at the expense of people like Laura Bailey. When a female voice actor is getting, any voice actor is getting bombarded because of stuff that a character did, you don't go, "We support, la, la, la." You go, if you want to be mad at somebody, be mad at me. Or you say nothing and just let it ride out and support them behind the scenes. You do not fan the fucking flames with this, well, if you don't like it, you're a misogynist and you hate this and you hate that, right? As somebody who has had male superiors grandstand allegedly on my behalf and has made it worse, and then they get mad at me when it blows up, the women involved usually don't like it, And a lot of them are smarter than me, so they smile and say nothing. I can't. And you're always the bad guy when something is mishandled and you fight back. That's the mistake Gina Carano made. She couldn't just eat the shit. That's what you have to do. If you compare The Last of Us to other PlayStation first parties that had rough goes of it pre-launch, the God of War franchise is the big one for me, but Ghost of Tsushima as well, because Ghost of Tsushima had the misfortune to release only a month after The Last of Us 2, and its arc was very different. And so it became this Ghost of Tsushima versus Last of Us thing, which was not fair to either game. But the Sucker Punch people and the Sony Santa Monica people have been so classy and so high road and so just good about the whole thing. They both make a point of congratulating other studios when they hit milestones. I noticed that both of them have been, hey, The Last of Us sold, I forget, there was some congratulations. And if you look it up, yeah, both Tsushima and Ragnarok have outpaced The Last of Us 2 after that meteoric launch with The Last of Us 2. It stalled. And no one needs to call attention to it. Everybody's seen it, but they're being gracious. The discipline and the restraint that the God of War dev team had when there is a toxic pocket of God of War fandom that was demanding a release date. They got really cranky. And Sony Santa Monica was just like, just trust us. Just trust us. Just trust us. They didn't take the bait. They didn't fan the flames. And that is hard. And I credit them for their discipline. Now, Ghost of Tsushima is risking becoming another Bloodborne, which Bloodborne fandom is oddly irritating, and there's just a pocket of toxic fans in that game that are one of those 60 frames remaster, and don't dare say, and this is a weird one, but Bloodborne, if you just download the PS4 version of Bloodborne through PS Plus on the PlayStation 5, there are performance improvements. The game looks amazing still, plays fine on PS5. There is no need for a remaster. You want to get dogpiled on Twitter, say that. I'm not kidding. It's ridiculous. You're starting to see the Ghost of Tsushima sequel stuff start now. It is too soon. Hopefully we will not become a toxic fandom with Ghost of Tsushima, because there was an example of there was anti's toxicity where this game's appropriation, and then, the various cultures depicted in the game went, no, we're going to make them ambassadors for our island because it's so good. And that was toxicity from the outside, not within the fandom. It's an example of it's not just because a group is under siege. They managed it because the creators, the spokespeople, did not fan the flames of the conflict. It can be done. Let's keep doing it, because this toxic fandom shit, I'm so done. So I'll leave it there. Add to the list other points you think lead to the toxic fandom. Like I said, this is a work in progress. Help support this channel. Become a monthly patron, patreon.com/LeannaK, or buy a one-time Leanna Care session for someone who can use it but can't afford it, coffee.com/LeannaK.